For over a decade, Jordan Peterson has become a global cultural phenomenon, a spiritual guide for millions of souls lost amid the chaos of the modern age. As a clinical psychologist and university professor, he did not choose to soothe his audience with gentle reassurances. Instead, Peterson stood upright on the lectern, using language as sharp as a razor to remind the world of a harsh truth. Life is suffering, and the only way to endure is to shoulder responsibility yourself. His philosophy was built on the intersection of mythology, religion, and depth psychology. He helped young people find meaning in cleaning their own room before attempting to change the world, helping them understand that each individual is an entity capable of confronting the dragon of chaos. Peterson did not merely teach, he became a symbol of steadfastness, a powerful intellectual voice willing to challenge contemporary social structures to defend the values of truth and individuality. His position in the public eye was that of a man who seemed to have answers to every existential crisis. People saw in him a razor-sharp intellect, a spirit unshaken by media storms or heated debates on stage. Peterson appeared as a fortress of structure and order, inspiring millions to stand up straight with their shoulders back. Yet, behind that solid intellectual armor, few knew that Jordan Peterson was facing an enemy that no rule or mythological framework could defeat. A truth recently revealed by his daughter showed that the 63-year-old professor was trapped in a nightmare more terrifying than any tragedy he had ever described in his writings. At the beginning of 2024, the world was stunned when Michaela Peterson decided to lift the veil on her father's real condition. She used a single word to describe what he was going through: hell. It was not a metaphor for depression or public pressure, but a brutal medical reality known as akathisia. Michaela affirmed that this was the worst thing she had ever seen a human endure, a state in which death could sometimes appear as a gentler release than continued existence. Imagine a prison without bars, where the guards are your own nervous system. Akathisia turns the body into a hostile environment, creating an unbearable inner agitation that prevents the sufferer from sitting still, lying down, or even finding a moment of rest. Peterson, the man who had spent his life teaching control over behavior and thought, was now thrust into an inescapable vortex. He could not find calm even in sleep, because every fiber, every cell was screaming for meaningless movement that could never truly satisfy. This nightmare grew even more horrifying as it attacked his senses directly. A man who once loved music and art suddenly experienced sound as needles piercing his eardrums. Daylight became visual torment, and even his ability to perceive normal colors was disrupted. The world around him transformed into a gray, distorted mass of pain, where all intellectual pleasures were suffocated by the collapse of his nervous system. Tragically, in this darkest moment, Peterson's grand philosophy seemed to meet its ultimate limit. Every rule about standing up straight, every story of heroes overcoming adversity that he once taught, appeared powerless before the force of pure biology. Language, his sharpest weapon, his greatest pride, failed entirely against this suffering. When a human being is tormented by neurological damage at the cellular level, metaphors about meaning fall into a terrifying silence. This collapse did not occur by chance. It was the result of a chain of compounded tragedies and devastating medical missteps that pushed a towering intellect to the brink of destruction. No fortress falls in a single night, and neither did Jordan Peterson. His breakdown in 2024 was the consequence of a series of brutal psychological triggers that reactivated old wounds. In the same year, he faced the loss of both his father and mother, the final emotional pillars of his life. At the same time, constant relocation across countries and accidental exposure to toxic mold in his living environment created a perfect storm that overwhelmed the already fragile immune system of the 63-year-old man. The true tragedy began when medical complications followed one another like a cruel joke of fate. For 6 months, despite consulting leading specialists, Peterson was repeatedly misdiagnosed. His symptoms were mistaken for common psychological disorders, leading treatment in entirely the wrong direction. As his body weakened, he developed severe pneumonia, which progressed into sepsis, a life-threatening condition. In the hospital, where salvation should have been found, a fatal error occurred. Powerful medications used to combat sepsis triggered a devastating adverse reaction within his sensitive nervous system, worsening the akathisia. Peterson fell into a medical trap. The drugs meant to save his life became the very toxins that intensified his internal torment beyond endurance. He was not only fighting bacteria, but also battling the very chemicals flowing through his bloodstream. This collapse was not merely a problem of 2024. It stemmed from a deep-rooted darkness that had long existed within the Peterson family across generations. A genetic curse that medication could only temporarily mask but never erase. Looking at Peterson's breakdown, it is easy to blame temporary pressures, but in reality, he had carried a biological battle within him long before fame arrived. The Peterson family bloodline bore the weight of severe depression, an unwanted hereditary legacy passed down through generations. For Jordan, depression was not a fleeting psychological state, but a biological shadow always lurking at the threshold, forcing him to maintain iron discipline just to avoid being consumed. The real tragedy began when that genetic darkness collided with a trap known as benzodiazepine. When his wife, Tammy, was diagnosed with a rare and dangerous form of cancer, Jordan Peterson fell into a state of extreme anxiety. In order to remain standing and care for his wife, he began taking clonazepam as prescribed by doctors. But this sedative proved to be a double-edged sword. It provided a fleeting illusion of calm, only to silently create a devastating physical dependence. The harrowing detox in Russia in 2020, where he had to be placed into a medically induced coma to break that dependence, was merely the first chapter of a far deeper injury. Experts suggest that years of medication use and the brutal withdrawal process led to what is known as mitochondrial dysfunction. Peterson's nervous system became like an electronic circuit that had once short-circuited, leaving behind permanent neurological scars. These scars may lie dormant under normal conditions, but under extreme pressure or chemical disruption, they can flare up with multiplied destructive force, turning his body into a ticking time bomb. It was precisely this neurological scarring that transformed his recovery in 2024 into a grueling odyssey, where medicine was no longer a solution, leaving only willpower and the devotion of those closest to him. In the darkened rooms where Jordan Peterson struggled against the storm of akathisia, strength did not come from sharp philosophical arguments, but from trembling hands that never let go. The presence of his wife, Tammy, became a living miracle. Having just emerged from her own battle with life-threatening cancer, she did not rest, but instead stepped into another war to pull her husband back from the edge. Her resilience, along with the devotion of their daughter Michaela Peterson and son Julian, formed an invisible circle of protection, a fortress of family, where faith was no longer an abstract religious concept, but the act of clinging to life even through painful breaths. Peterson's recovery journey in 2024 became a humiliating and solitary march. It demanded an extreme level of biological discipline beyond imagination. Every meal, every hour of sleep, every exposure to sound had to be strictly controlled to give his weakened nervous system a chance to heal. The man who once traveled the world lecturing about self-mastery now had to relearn how to control the smallest movements of his own body. Learning patience with pain without knowing when it might end. It was a complete surrender to human limitation, a silent battle without applause, only clenched teeth and quiet tears in the night. Faced with her father's suffering, Michaela Peterson chose to turn family tragedy into a warning for society. She spoke openly about the potentially deadly dangers of long-term reliance on psychiatric medications. She exposed a bitter truth. Modern medical systems can be quick to prescribe, yet dangerously slow and inadequate in warning about side effects that can completely razrush a human life. Her message was not only a defense of her father, but an attempt to save others unknowingly stepping into the same chemical trap. Amid this extreme suffering and physical collapse, Jordan Peterson is now demonstrating an entirely new form of courage, one that goes far beyond anything he once wrote in his books. When we look at Jordan Peterson in 2024, we no longer see a polished speaker on grand stages, nor a cultural warrior engaged in fiery debates. Instead, we see a human being of flesh and blood facing the harshest test of existence, the biological will to survive each day in a body that is betraying him. True courage, it turns out, is not having answers to every question, but the ability to endure unbearable pain while preserving the last fragment of dignity. Peterson is no longer teaching through words, he is teaching through his existence. He stands as a living embodiment of what he once wrote, a fragile, finite being standing at the boundary between order and chaos, still striving to remain upright in the storm. Regardless of how the world debates him, no one can deny the strength of the human spirit when pushed to its limits. Jordan Peterson is now living the greatest lesson of his life, carrying the cross of personal suffering and continuing forward, even when every step bears the weight of the hell of akathisia. His struggle is a reminder to all of us of the value of mental health, the power of family bonds, and a simple yet profound truth. Even when language fails, even when the body breaks, the will to live and to love remains a light that nothing can extinguish. The story of Jordan Peterson is not just about a distinguished scholar, but about a human being practicing exactly what he has taught, standing firm even as the world around him collapses. Through what he has endured and continues to endure, we understand that suffering spares no one. But how we face it defines who we are. What lesson from Jordan Peterson resonates with you the most? Do you believe human willpower can overcome such brutal biological adversity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this video gave you a new perspective on courage and empathy, support us by liking and subscribing to the channel. We will continue to bring you stories about influential figures and the lesser-known truths behind them. Thank you for listening. Stay responsible for yourself, and we'll see you in the next journeys ahead.